This meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
Since we, started the, Center for Racial Justice, and we've had a few folks that were in prison for things they haven't committed. Some 27 years, some 17 years, but none as long as you have. Reading y'all's biography, and certainly from the perspective of myself and the audience, we'd love for you all to share your story with us. And that's how, I think, beyond teaching and learning, we learn best by storytelling. That's always best, and storytelling really tells us a lot beyond, we have all these textbooks back here, all these books that we read, et cetera, but you never, really get it out until you actually hear people's story. And then we're gonna, and much of our audience is ready to engage. They have questions of their own, et cetera. They'll be putting it up on the live chat, and I'll be the moderator, kind of leading the questions that are being asked. But we'll let you all introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves, and just kind of share your story with us, and then we can get into dialogue, beyond that.
Okay. Well, I'm Mike Davis, formerly Mike Africa of the MOVE organization, but now I'm just Mike Davis. And 4 years ago, our son, went on a journey that finally freed us from a 100-year sentence. We had a sentence of 30 to 100 years for a confrontation that took place in 1978. But before that, I guess we should explain how we met. And but Debbie, you can introduce yourself before I start.
Okay. And is there audiences, or is everybody on their own screen? Computer?
No, there's a separate link. Everybody can see you all and hear it.
Oh, okay.
But they're not we're only through on the Zoom.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm Debbie, and I first like to apologize for the whole situation. This is the first time this has ever happened to us at any event, even when we've gone to California. It's just the first time ever, and it was such a situation that we had to make a decision, because as this thing continues, this is another piece, another link up that's keeping us strapped to the injustice system, that is just, until we get commuted, and hopefully we are going to get commuted, it's just going to be that way. But like I said, this was definitely a fluke, because even at the last day, the parole officer that we have, he will say, okay, well, okay, go ahead and go, and I'll go ahead and okay it. But at the point they had given us 2 new ones, we didn't realize that. So that's what caused it, the trip to get canceled. And we just didn't want to take that chance, being in New Orleans, not knowing, and so we just decided that's it. But we apologize again for this, and well.
And be that as it may, we will at some point honor the plans we've made to come down.
And we're gonna love to have you. And we talked about that this morning. I said, let's not cancel another thing. Let's go ahead and have the Zoom, and then we can plan something else.
Yes,
right.
yes.
Right.
But and then thank you for having us, and thank you, Dillard, for having us. But yeah, I'm Debbie, and Mike and I have been married for almost 50 years, if not longer. Separated by a 40-year jail term. I also am an ex-MOVE member. We were in prison since 1978. We were released in 2018, which was 40 years later. And as Mike said, at a big, it was a big thing for our son, who was born in prison. I actually had him in prison in my jail cell. And so he grew up to come back to free us from prison. And he succeeded with, of course, a lot of other support, massive support, and from our families and our supporters. It's been a long journey. I don't know if I want to call it a journey, but it's been a long ride. But, we're here to answer whatever people want to hear or know about us, because there's a lot.
Yeah. So Debbie and I met, we were in the same neighborhood. Actually, we were right around the corner from each other. And Debbie actually lived, it's amazing to me still that she lived so close to my family's house, and I had not seen anybody from her family for the 5 years they were there until the day we met. And that was by chance, because we, on an errand from my mother, my brother and I were going up the street, and back then there was streets in the summertime known as play blocks, where the city of Philadelphia would go choose randomly certain streets to go up and set up shop, where they would have these portable basketball courts and all these kind of games for kids to play during the summer. And we didn't even know it was there. We went past the block and saw them going up and playing out in the street. And we came up there, and I just happened to see her, and was immediately, wow, this is a nice looking girl. I'd like to meet her. They were playing a game of what was that? King ball. They were playing king ball. So my brother and I just asked to join, and we immediately start playing really aggressive, and
we told them no at first.
Right.
We didn't want them to play.
Yeah, and that's how we met. And we was playing all aggressively, and then they fussed us out.
It was hate at first sight. Because they beat us so bad.
Yeah.
I couldn't take it. My ego couldn't take it. I said, oh man.
Right.
I told them they cheated and everything. So
but by the end of the summer we were
by the end of the summer was,
yeah. So that's how we met. And that was in 1969. We were both 14 years old. And ever since then, we've been together. And later on, a few years later, just the things that we experienced in our community with police violence and a lot of things that was going on in the national stage, we were all concerned about it, and we would talk about it sometimes, even though we wasn't involved in any of the, like the warfare kind of directly. But indirectly we were, because our friends were being arrested and accosted, and it concerned us. So,
and these were arrests that weren't even like, these were like our friends that would come in our houses. Like these were people who we knew who would get arrested in school. For instance, they might have had a fallout with another student, and however it became to be a police situation. I guess the teacher called the cops or something. They took him down to the police station, and they roughed him up, beat him up. He was 15 years old. And then another friend of ours, mutual friends of ours, Hank, same thing. He was about 13 or 14. And they roughed him up some kind of way. I don't know why. They stopped him on the street for some reason. And it started kind of perking our interest and fear kind of in this police brutality, because at this time, the Panthers were like a really big thing in Philly, so a lot of the kids were trying to pattern themselves after the Panthers, because they also, especially older kids, were more up on the whole injustice situation, whereas we weren't quite, but it was definitely something that was alarming.
Yeah. So, not quite at that point, because we were still in school. Debbie made it a point that, she wanted to graduate high school. And, by this point, later on, this is a few years later, I had joined the Marine Corps. And while on leave, I came home to a situation where the same thing was going on. This is like 73. Then into 74. So the same things were going on. And we had been going down to hear some of the philosophy of the MOVE organization at this point. And Debbie's family had, Debbie's family, who had been heavily involved at this point, and going to demonstrations and the like. And I wasn't particularly interested in that type of activism at that time. But at one of the demonstrations or one of the encounters, they had arrested Debbie's little brother, Chuck, who at that point was like 13 himself, and given him a 10-day jail sentence for truancy or something. And Chuck, had put out information that I'm learning a real education down here. I don't want to be involved, whatever. But they arrested him for 10 days and put him in jail. I went to that demonstration. At that demonstration, I was put straight from the bus straight into the back of a paddy wagon. No questions asked, and taken down to the Roundhouse in Philadelphia and given $10,000 bail and taken up to the detention center. And while I wasn't particularly interested, like I said, in being that active in activism, that gave me a new perspective. Yeah.
And then from there, we both liked some of what we heard from MOVE, as far as the teachings, as far as exercise, caring for animals, trying to help to protect the environment. These were all things that we really liked, the family aspect of it, that, especially, just interested us also. And we heard after that demonstration, we heard that MOVE was going to be demonstrating against every police district in Philadelphia, because it was like this stuff was going on randomly all the time. At the time, Mayor Frank Rizzo was the mayor of Philadelphia, and he was a very notorious mayor who was noted for police brutality, and he made no excuses for it. He made no excuses for it. His cops was right all the time. Well, if he shot somebody and killed him, it was just a mistake, and no excuse, no apologies for it. I mean, he made excuses for it. He made no apologies for it. And so that was just a big issue in the 70s. And by that time, Mike and I had decided to join MOVE. And one of the things that when we also joined these demonstrations against at the police districts, and then against Mayor Rizzo personally at different locations that he was going to be at, he vowed to shut MOVE up, because at this point now he was taking everything personal. And it was just one of those knockdown, drag out kind of situations where, well, I'm the mayor, I'm the tough guy, and you think you're tough, I'm gonna show you who's tough. And these are the things that he was actually coming out saying. And so then after so many years, of some brutality that was happening even against MOVE at that point, it turned into a confrontation in 1977, where 1977, and then, we stayed in our house. We boarded up our house, and we told him we wasn't taking any more beatings from them, and if they come at us, they're going to have to come at us hard, because we weren't backing down. And from there, a raid happened in 1978 where the cops just came in, and came.
Well, first they surrounded us for a year.
Oh, right, yeah.
They surrounded us for a year,
The whole
where
house.
the whole 2-block
Oh, yeah.
radius they surrounded. And if anyone lived in that vicinity, that 2-block radius, they had to show ID, and they could only have 2 visitors in their own home, because they had cordoned off everything and moved cars, everything, and was just watching us for a year. If we got down off the platform of MOVE headquarters, we would be immediately arrested.
Yeah, this was a neighborhood where people were actually put out of their houses, and they cordoned off the whole area for 2 whole blocks radius around the house. They didn't allow, at some point, they didn't allow food in, they didn't allow water in, because they were trying to starve us out of the house.
So for 50 days,
they did that. 50 days they did that. Yeah. But this was a neighborhood where they had police presence in houses across the street from us, 3rd floors with guns in them, pointed at the house. And this was, like I said, in a 2-block radius around the whole, in that neighborhood, period.
And one of the apartments that they took over to watch us from was our own apartment, Debbie and I's apartment, which we lived across the street.
Was this
You know,
beyond
so
just
everybody,
was this just the two of you, or was this other people in the movement that they were eyeing as well on the block area?
well, everybody that was in the MOVE organization that was in the compound once they locked it down had to stay there or be arrested when they came out.
Right. So this was all of us.
But we did not live together. We, I know
We didn't live at the actual headquarters.
perception is that we all lived in one building. No, we lived throughout the neighborhoods in Philadelphia, but once we went in there, then we were locked in there. So we all had to stay there. And Debbie and I happened to have had an apartment across the street from MOVE headquarters on Powelton Avenue. And once we were locked in, at some point they went in and threw all our stuff out the windows and stuff and used it to watch the headquarters. So that's just one of the houses. But anyway, you were saying.
But yeah, from there, after they tried to starve us out, they decided, well, anyway, to speed it up, because it's a really long story, but in 1978, that's when they came in armed to the teeth with all kinds of weaponry and demanded that we come out the house. At this point, they raided the house, and an officer ended up getting killed for that. And for that, we ended up getting 30 to 100 years convicted. 9 of us, not just the 2 of us, but 9 of us ended up getting 30 to 100 years in prison for that. It was 12 of us in the house, but 9 of us got convicted for that murder of the officer. And from there, we spent 40 years in prison. We came home in 2018. And we've been out almost 5 years.
Yeah, and this is a story that is documented. If you YouTube it, I guess, research it, is something that you can see because
Right.
it was documented. But yeah, we spent as a result of that confrontation. And
Can I backtrack a second? I mean, obviously,
Sure.
who murdered the officer?
Well, we feel like they did. We feel like one of them did, and that
It
because
wasn't any of the 9 of you. It wasn't none of the 9 of you.
No, because they never proved, and there had to be a doubt. There was never any real proof that we did actually kill the officer, because number one, they destroyed 45 minutes later, once they got everybody out the house, they destroyed the whole, it was 2 houses. They destroyed the whole 3-story 2 houses. They tore it down. That was on the orders of Mayor Rizzo. They tore everything down. So there wasn't even a way that they could actually prove anything, because there was no evidence of anything. They even tore down the tree that was in front of the house where there were bullet holes, we know, in the tree. Because they took pictures of it. And that's how we knew that. That's the only way we knew that, because they had pictures of it. But the actual physical evidence was all destroyed. And then just based on that, under legal law, they was just on a technicality, they were supposed to throw that out because they couldn't prove anything. But even the evidence that they claimed that they had, that we saw, were pictures and just cops' testimony. That's pretty much it. But actually, when the judge was asked who actually killed, he said, I don't know. He said, I haven't the faintest idea. And those are his words exactly. I haven't the faintest idea. So he said, all I know is that somebody in the house did it. But how he come to that conclusion, there's still a mystery.
And even in sentencing, he said that since you said you were a family, we're going to sentence you
right
as a family, and guilt is shared by all.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question I'm going to stop here for both of you. When you say you don't know, but you do know, right? The system, as they say, it works the way they want it to work.
Yeah.
And this seems like an instance, and I've been in rooms where everybody knows what had happened, but nobody wants to admit it, et cetera. It's all about spite, revenge. Even the judge probably knew you all were innocent, but again, revenge and spite, and that's where I'm gonna get to another conversation later on, where we are with the state of police even today. So
yeah, that's true, Miguel. And there's so many other examples to point to, and this is why people just lose so much trust in the system, because it's just so one-sided, and it's just blatant. So anyway, here we are, and we're just, really trying to pick up the pieces and trying to kind of live a somewhat life before too long, because we're already 65 and 66 or something like that.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Those years. But let me go back, just kind of, because you mentioned, having a son in prison, and obviously you all weren't able to raise him in his adult years, but reading just a little excerpt you all sent, I have to admire, the dedication that he had to you all. I don't know who he was raised by, I don't know if it was a relative or, et cetera, but he obviously was able to grow up and realize what had happened, and to be able to support you all and share the videos and the book, et cetera. So that has to be something of, and I guess even getting out of prison eventually, as you all have the last 5 years, and getting to know your son. How has that been like, since the entire experience? My second question, you mentioned earlier being arrested, but also separated. So you all weren't together for 40 years. You all were separated, correct?
Right.
Right. And how that was, and then kind of coming back together, just from a humanity point of view. I'd like to, and those that are in the chat, please put your Q&A questions, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A. But if you can kind of talk about those two different entities and how that was.
Right. So when we were arrested, we had
well, first when having our son in prison was a really hardship, but it was when I think about it now, and as we've talked through the years, there was a lot of comical parts in it too, because who has a baby in jail, like in a prison cell with like no nurses, no hospital, no nothing, and then have a baby in jail and then go report it to the officer, and the officer's like, oh no, she didn't have no baby in jail. So that was a lot of
well, you got to give a little context to that too. When we were arrested, Debbie was 8 months pregnant.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
She was already 8 months pregnant.
Oh, right.
People might think,
right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
She was 8 months pregnant already when we were talking about that whole confrontation. That was 8 months pregnant, and so they knew if they didn't know how far along she was pretty big, so they knew she was, expecting at some point soon. So they had a watch on her.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we were having preliminary hearings in one of the prisons, one of the Philadelphia County prisons. Mm-hmm. And one day Debbie didn't appear, and so the judge sent for where she at. She was supposed to be there. And at that point, the matrons didn't know that Debbie had given birth, because she did it, as she said, without any kind of help from anyone, actually, the other sisters that was in the cell. Mm-hmm. Right. So you can finish it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, after having my son, he was, I just sent word to Mike by one of the other sisters to saying I had, the baby, and he was, he was okay. So I sent him home with my mother. She had to come pick him up from the hospital. At that point, they said I had to go to the hospital because they didn't want that liability on the jail at all. So I went to the hospital with him, and I released him to my mother. Now they had him because we also had a young daughter too. So she kept them for a while, and then after, let me see, they were actually taken to move when they were younger, because we were still all a part of MOVE, including my mother. Mm-hmm. At that point. And so they were in MOVE for a while, but then she took him out of MOVE, and then he was born in MOVE, but they weren't always in MOVE. So now he came back to MOVE when he was about 13 or 14, and he wanted to help free his parents and the other people, MOVE people that were in prison. And so he just, he vowed that he would do whatever he could, and he, that's what he did. He participated in whatever was going on. Met with judges, met with officials, met with all kinds of officials and politicians to help get this done. So I mean, it was a very laudable, plaudable experience for me and for Mike too, because it was so much dedication. And and we didn't always have the contact. He did have contact with his dad more than me at the time when we were in jail, but there's always was some kind of contact there back and forth. And so he really knew his dad even more. We were so far away, and at the time there was no telephone call. There was no telephone calls. So it was a tough time. It was a really, really tough time. Um, but then over the years, as he grew up, that was the one thing I was really happy about when the kids got grown. Even though I spent all that time in jail, I was happy when they got grown. They could make their own decisions, because it's a struggle. It really is a struggle trying to cope with that, trying to navigate with that, and then seeing what's going on with your children and on the streets, and it's just hard. It's just really, really hard.
I would assume that you all, not assume, but I make the assumption that you all didn't see each other for 40 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, we saw each other, I think, once in some kind of other court case involving something else. No, we didn't see each other. We wrote letters. That's how we communicated.
So how was, I'm sure it was, how was it when you all, 40 years is a long time, because that's most of what I've lived. So how was it when you all saw each other, after all that time apart? I'm sure there's a lot of emotion,
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't that we didn't, we would send each other photos.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right. So visits and all. So, it wasn't too much of a shock.
Okay.
You start turning gray and, you look older and all. But, and Debbie looked pretty young throughout, so, but anyway, it was, if I hadn't been seeing her, if I had, she was my girl, and we communicated as much as we could. And we had home bases that we were calling, like her mother's house where, our kids were living. So we always, remained in constant contact. Some kind of way.
But it was emotional seeing, coming back together, because I was almost still like a school kid, like a teenager, because just not having the contact with him all those years, just coming together. It's really funny because I was out first, June 16th. I was out first. Mike didn't get out till October. So I was
2018.
Of 2000 of the same year. So I was living with my son, and then he got permission to also live with my son. So it was kind of like a package deal with the parole officer. They kind of went along with it and all that. But so when I was waiting for him to come home. The car, they were calling me like every 10 minutes. Okay, he's coming here. Okay, he's getting closer. We're half an hour away. So I was getting these calls from our supporters, and they would just like almost like tag him. Okay, he's getting closer. Like we had been, like like it was like really, really fresh. So, and I was just like a nervous 16 years old, getting ready to go on a date or something. So, but it was very emotional, but it was also just so bittersweet, because we had been apart so long. Our children had been, we weren't with them. So it was just so many emotions, just all wrapped up, in us. And when we seen each other, we must have hugged for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So much so that one of our supporter said, "Get a room."
The old adage, get a room. And
she videotaped that, but it was really, really, really good. It felt good, especially after being down that long. You just, I mean, I admit, I have these questions, like, is this ever going to happen? Especially when you didn't kill anybody, and that you just figure like how it's so much to go through, like just having to make yourself solid in a place where you don't want to be, where you're away from your family, away from your children. You can't have contact the way you want to and need to. And to feel like maybe I have to make this decision for myself to be settled here for the rest of my life. That's a hard thing to try to do. And so in trying to do that, you're really not doing it. You're really not. You inside of me was not doing that. It was like the hope was always there. So anything that would come along that I felt like I would grab a hold to, was still just another step forward to hope and just, this is going to happen one day, but at the time, we were given the sentence of 30 years to 100. Once 30 years came around, that was our minimum, and they denied us. And then another 2 years, they said, okay, you have to do 2 more years before you see this parole board again. And then another 2 years, and then they deny you again. And then they say, well, you have to wait another year, and then they deny you again. So year after year after year, they did this. And then you finally feel like, oh my God, what the heck? Like I said, especially when you know that you're not guilty of this crime. And this was a really hard thing.
We've had other speakers like yourselves who were in prison for crimes they didn't commit, and I guess it's hard kind of for us to put ourselves in these kinds of, with all the years you're in, and it's got to be, there's a statistic that came out that said 12.5% of people that are in prison today are innocent. And we go to Angola, we went to the women's state penitentiary a few weeks back, and people will say, well, what did you do? The students always ask, what did you do? Well, I'm innocent, and that's, and you believe them, I guess. I don't know, maybe they just know how to sell themselves. I don't know, that this many people that we're not, like, the system isn't working. And I've dealt with people and things like, how did this even get to this point? Like, the evidence is so clear that these people are innocent, but yet just railroaded. And it's been minorities in every single case, just being kind of railroaded, whether it's rape, whatever it is. And I've dealt with situations, and it's just very frustrating. And you go into prison, and the thing that is always said, well, we're not citizens anymore in prison. That's why it takes years and years and years before we've able to clear ourselves. How frustrating was it all those years? If it was your son or whoever is in the background working on this, what finally, hit the point where somebody kind of stepped in, whether it was a judge, a pilot, whatever it was, and said, we need to release these people. These are innocent. What was it, the tipping point at the end that somebody, that was like, okay, these people need to be cleared?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was I guess it was a perfect storm that came about. Our son was relentless, as well as other supporters that had been pounding pavements and doors for years. And there was a new DA that came on the scene that wasn't like the previous ones, where they, just refused to listen to any notion of an appeal being successful, or new evidence, or that we were railroaded to begin with. So
it was a combination of things too. It's like a combination, like Mike said, it was this new progressive DA, Larry Krasner, like just come into office. Actually, he wasn't in office quite, but he was getting into office. He was progressive DA. The cops hated him, like the FOP gave him no support. And so, but he happened to ironically come on the scene in Philadelphia, and he wanted to clean up the police force. He felt like he had, I don't know what his personal life was with experience with the police, but he knew that a lot of them were dirty. He ended up getting in that office, and he fired a whole bunch of them from the door.
Not just police, but
DAs. Oh yeah, DAs, right.
DAs.
And he vowed to be as fair as he could be. So he opened up this, what they call this integrity unit. And he opened up a lot of people's cases that were claiming to be innocent. And one of the cases that was brought in front of him, which was solicited by our son, who ended up hiring this lawyer, Brad Thompson, which Mike and Chuck had kind of found him, like he was writing to us before he became an actual lawyer, before he took his bar. And he said, like, look, I vowed to, I want to help you guys. He had actually been a victim of police brutality himself. And this is what actually really propelled him to want to do some cases on political cases. So he said he would take on the case, and he, so between Mike, Chuck and Mike Jr., they all worked with him, and they put together this big packet to take in front of the parole board at this point. And being with that and the DA, it's like it all kind of was a recipe for success for us. So like all these things came together at one time.
And by the way, Brad Thompson, the lawyer she just referenced, is from the People's Law Office in Chicago.
Right.
And they've had many successes in big, huge cases like ours, political cases, Attica and Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
And, just egregious cases. And that's where Brad Thompson
and Brett Grody.
Right.
So Brad Thompson's from the People's Law Office in Chicago. Brett Grody is from the Abolitionist Law Center here in Philadelphia. And they both teamed up. Brad got in touch with Brett Grody, and they teamed up together. And together, they put together these packages, including Martin Horn, who is an investigator now, but he was the secretary at the prison when we were in prison 35 years before that. So all this time, he now is an investigator, and he actually put together a very, very supportive recommendation for us to be released.
Right.
So,
and not of the prison. He's the secretary of Pennsylvania prison.
Right, Pennsylvania.
The whole state.
Yeah. So it was a good recipe that just came together at one time, just kind of like, push the whole thing.
And it's all documented. Our son Mike has a film called 40 Years a Prisoner that was on HBO, and it outlines and details a lot of the work and struggles he had in putting together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The students ask, what does your son do? Is he an attorney? I mean,
well, he's an
activist. Okay, yeah. I mean, this is not easy work. Sometimes you have to have really some strong backgrounds. So that's a good question.
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, Mike is just he's a determined, relentless son. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just for us that he did this. As Debbie said, he did it for the whole Move 9 that was in jail. But beyond that, he continues to support other political prisoners like Fred Hampton, his son, and
Mumia Abu Jamal.
Right.
And so but they can, if they look him up on Facebook, Mike Africa Jr., they'll find he's got everything. Instagram, Facebook, he's on, maybe not Facebook as much, but Instagram. And he's pretty popular out here.
Well, if anything came of this, I'll say it must be a blessing to have such a wonderful son.
Oh my goodness!
God bless you guys for if anything positive out of this, to have you were lucky to have a son like this. I'm going to shift. I'm going to ask one more question before I kind of shift to where we are today, because you all have come out of prison and you might have noticed where we are in society. Hasn't really changed, I guess, from observation. But just a question, just for my own. And please, those of you that are on the call or the chat, please post your questions. You guys were obviously on two separate prisons, and we've toured the men's prison, we toured women's prisons. How was your experiences? I don't know if you all talked amongst each other, how your experiences were, male versus, because we've seen that a lot. Did one of you have a better experience than the other, or I'm sure that in conversation, just in terms of the actual experience, in terms of, because when we went to the women's prison, it all seemed like a college campus, so, where the women's prison really seems like a prison, et cetera. And so I'm wondering, I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience have gone with me to these tours, how, in comparison, when you spend 40 years, how the difference was, or similarities, or from your experiences.
Yeah, well, it don't matter if, I can be.
Well, let me just say this too, before we get off that 172, because just not to give all the credit to our son too, but my mother was out there on the front line too. She tried for years, my aunt, and they tried for years and years. Mike's brothers, they would try to get in with clergy, the people, because he's a deacon at his church, and his whole church, he got them to support too. So there was also a lot of other support, especially with the families that behind the whole victory.
All right, and you can never overstate the commitment of people who also tried, and during one try. They bombed the house
Oh yeah.
and incinerated every occupant in there, and destroyed 62 other homes. They destroyed 2 city blocks.
Yeah, and that was May 13th, 1985, which is getting ready to come up soon.
Yeah.
For the-
So
Yeah.
their effort to free us, you know, we mentioned about the lawyers and all that, but you know,
Mhm.
before that was their
Yeah,
effort.
right.
And that was the city's response in that. And recently, the now mayor of Philadelphia, Mary Kenney, said in a statement to the press that for 50 years, the city has gotten it wrong in dealing with MOVE organization. For 50 years. So,
Yeah.
but we're still on parole for 100 years for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
You know, and other people as well as, you know, continue to suffer. They had, anyway.
But yeah, the men's prisons and the female prison were definitely totally different. Totally different.
Right. So I was going to make a statement about that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it, you know, just because one looks like this plush place to live in, you're still in prison.
Right.
You know, so regardless of the housing, you know, I'm not saying that when we first went to prison, they had a spigot and a bucket in there, you know, and later it became faucets in each, you know, each cell.
Mm-hmm.
You're still in a cell. You're still in a cell, and it's still prison. You know, so I don't care how the surroundings look or how they appear. You can't go home. You know, when you can't go home, you still feel oppressed, and you know they have some prisons that are worse than others in the state of Pennsylvania. And certainly in the country, they have worse ones where you just mentioned one when we first came on, I forgot which one you said. But that's a notorious one that you mentioned. And then, of course, Attica. So you have,
Marion lockdown.
right, you have really bad places. But again, you know, Debbie was in one, I was in another. The conditions that the women faced while there were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And they do look like campuses, but they were horrible the way they were treated.
Yeah. Especially when we first went to prison. I mean, we, not us personally at that, well, yeah, some of it, but I mean, we gotta, I mean, just marinate on this for a minute, everybody, because when we went to prison, it's exactly like Mike said. Picture those old fashioned prison that you see now with a long cell blocks where everything is metal. You hear the clanging doors and there's nothing in this cell. You see the bars on the outside of the cell, and you see a toilet with a spigot over it that runs cold water, and you're locked in this cell, and you're mopping the floors with what they call pine jelly. This is what they mopped the floors with back then, and this was with those big galvanized buckets and big giant ringers that you had to sling with these giant mops. And when you see it, that's exactly how it was. So, you know, like Mike said, it's still a prison. And although it did look, or Muncie did look, well, because it used to be a way home for women. And I think Cambridge used to be a college campus, but like, and the women did have to go through a lot of stuff too. Sometimes even worse than the men, because when we first went to the jail, and it wasn't even a prison yet, you know, they were strapping them down, you know, if they wanted them to take medication, when they were starting to experiment with this thorazine medication, and women that were unruly as they saw as unruly, it would just give mouth back to officers. You couldn't even swear. You couldn't even curse it at an officer. You would get immediately put in a cell, given some kind of days or something like that. So and we in fact move women, would actually raise Cain when we would see these girls strapped down on beds, and they would be crying sometimes for 2 and 3 days, and we was like, no. And so we went right for them to confront them right from the beginning. No, this is not right. And we just started giving them information finally until they just let them out of these restraints. So it was a lot to break in when we first went to jail. It was a lot to break in because these were brutal conditions that people were living on. as time went on, we went to the bigger prisons. As years went on, things got a little more, quote, so-called, like a lot better, because they had gardens and dog programs and stuff. And that's what we kind of came a part of, like doing this. You had to find something to do. You have to find something to keep yourself busy. We ran every day. We worked out. We exercised. That was the extent of it at first. But then as time went on, we got into a garden class, and then, dog training, which we got a lot of skills from.
Yeah. And I was in a prison, Holmesburg prison. We were in the one where they were experimenting on prisoners. Where the book Medical Apartheid speaks on, references a lot. They were experimenting on people, and anyway, so that's the prison. So,
and then the women had to be subjected to, in a lot of situations, to male pat searches. At some point in like 92, they started this male pat search with males. They had got the policy from the DOC that they were allowed to actually run their hands down females and pat search them for any contraband if they thought they had. And that was another demonstration that MOVE women did not go for. And we raised Cain about that. We had to write all over the country, just to get that thing, off of us. And we wouldn't do it. We went to the whole floor. We would just, we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't submit to any male pat search. That's just crazy. If you look in the dictionary to see molestation, it's exactly how that policy was written. You have the right to take your hands and go down the females, all down her sides and breast. And I mean, it's literally in black and white. This is what they were saying. And we refused to submit to that. So that was just another hurdle that we had to cross, and to cross it with the other women, because they finally did eventually, they just dropped it eventually after so many years. But
so that and other issues, we wound up spending years in the hole for resisting and protesting.
Yeah. So
I'd like to spend the last few minutes we have as we look at, you all being released, and we're sort of at you went to prison because of policing, and we seem to be, and the Center for Racial Justice started because of the George Floyd murder, and that's how we got our initiation started. This whole issue of the policing and brutality, which seems to be nonstop in our country. We had Miss Mona Hardin and her daughter for one interview a few weeks back. Her son Ronald Green was murdered by 4 white police officers a few years back, 2019 in Louisiana. We also had Greg Foster, his mom, in the audience as well, who her son Sabria, her son was killed by the police in Atlanta. And then we also had a visual for Tyree Nichols. I mean, that whole thing has been sort of, and we just had the state of Louisiana is being investigated right now. We're under investigation for police brutality. So we've been working with ACLU and trying to help and address these things, because these things just go on and on and on. Nobody seems to do anything. I mean, the evidence is as clear as day. The videos are there, and what is taking so long? And the frustration, I mean, people were hollering. We had a forum with plenty of, in October, people are screaming. They're tired of just sitting and talking. It's like, am I going to die before anything happens? Before I interviewed on television with the Tyree, they had me sit down and watch the video. They didn't want me to interview until I watched the whole video. And you saw 13 officers just like didn't care. Just like this was just. And I think the frustrating thing out of that, and when we talk about the system, was you could tell this was not a one-time incident. The way they were talking, the way this is how they operate day to day. This is, And so what trust do we have in the police, and where are we in regards to policing? Because there's we don't trust the police. We don't trust who do we trust? And as was mentioned in the one-on-one interview we had, years ago, the citizens were lynching the people. Now, and the police didn't have to worry about it per se. There's a great analogy. Now the police are just doing the lynching. And so, and as we watch these videos and watch what's going on, and we just had one up in Shreveport, Louisiana recently, another police brutality issue. You just can't believe what you're watching. Where does it stop? I mean, I guess that's where, you can't say we're going to get rid of the police. We need police. I don't know. I think you'd have complete chaos. But where does it stop? Where do we, what is it that we do? We can keep talking. The president can get on a State of the Union address and keep talking, but nothing is changing. And so what do we do? How do we address this? I don't know. I mean, are there answers to this? And I'll let you all just kind of, because you've come out and you're dealing with the same issues as you dealt with 40 years ago. It's the same and even worse. So I just like to hear from you all in terms of, where we are? I mean, where do you see? Are y'all still kind of, activists in regards to this? I mean, what have you all been? I mean, it was the wrong question. What have you looked at your lives at 5 years and going into the future in regards to this? How does it? Have you come out and said, well, I'm going to continue to be activists and work on this, or what's your mindset now after all these years?
Well, our mindset is responding to a call to speak to you guys, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing from the beginning.
Mhm.
Just speaking out and speaking truth to the situations. It's not that the system is not working. The system is working just as it was designed to work. And the people who are filling up the prisons is the people who were designed to go in the first place. People give their votes and they keep on hoping that things are going to change. And do they? You just said, correctly, that we came out 40 years later and it's more of the same. And
well, I think one of the things that came up in our interviews, and you see the tears and the emotion, the governor's covering it up, our politics, everybody's covering this stuff up, and so these are the people that are elected we elect to address this. It's just cover up after cover up after cover up, and it's not just one governor, it's multiple. It's just multiple just cover ups. We're just protecting our police, and why are we protecting this?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just as it's like Mike said, the system is working the way they want it to work. And as he always point out, this is a capitalistic society, a capitalistic government.
Right.
And as long as you have a capitalistic government, you have underclass that they're required. You have an underclass that is required.
Yeah.
And as long as they're required, they're going to be situations and events, situations that are going to warrant people to want to fight. Because as long as you have underclass, you're going to have poor people. You're going to have people that are hungry, people that don't have equality. They don't have justice. So you're going to have fights on your hands. And this is just the way the system is designed to work for them. But the only thing that, we've had this conversation, Mike and I and other people, my sisters and people that are in the movement, we've had this conversation too. And the only thing I can say is that I feel that as long as I've been alive, you've seen injustice, civil rights movements, racial movements. You've seen all kinds of movements that come up against these policies, and nothing ever really changes. They say, okay, well, we'll put a black cops in here. Now we're going to put black judges in here, but then it still really never changes. And it's always going to be that way. All we can do as a people is do what we are doing and speaking out.
I think what Tyree Nichols' case was sort of a little bit unique because it was black on black, but the way he was stopped is just driving home. I mean, and you watch that video, I said, that could be me. They didn't read him his rights, they didn't tell him what he was doing. They just took that man out of his car and just beat the hell out of him. And all he was just calling for his mom. It just and I think the frustrating thing, I think with that case, they reacted quickly in terms of arrests and things of that nature, the chief. But I think what frustrated me was, chief, whoever the head of the police was in Memphis, has been going on. This was not the first time you've seen this, And I said that whole place needed to be, cleaned out. I mean, again, we need police, but if I'm living in Memphis, what do I trust if I see 13 officers acting like this?
Right. Yeah. And just recently, the one, I can't remember his name, but the one guy, his son was killed by cops, and he said, he's an avid police supporter. He said, but this is just really, he was white guy. He said, this is really he almost didn't have the words to say, this is like more than egregious. Like, he wasn't even doing anything. He was just driving, and maybe it was mistaken identity or whatever, but he couldn't digest it. So things appear to be getting better with certain things, but like you said, this has been happening, but it's only because they have cameras now and it's out in the open, and even with that, they still get away with stuff. But it's used
I
to be
think
so much money.
yeah, I think the
They can't.
frustrating thing is when George Floyd and George Floyd Act, that things are going to be much more transparent, and you just kind of wonder if much has changed. I have a friend who's a lawyer within law enforcement. He says he just reacts to me, all these things that go on, and it's just still cover-ups, just band-aiding, just trying not to penalize. So it's like, well, this is not transparency. This is not, we're still protecting. If any of us did this in our jobs, we'd be fired. It just goes on and on and on. And so I don't know. I mean, we still have, dilemmas because this is still happening, and again, it's always been happening, I guess now with our phones and video and cameras. I think what frustrated me watching the Tyree Nichols, there's body cam. They didn't have cameras on. They could care less that anybody was going to do anything to them. So obviously this was a culture of the department. That's exactly what was going on, so.
I think all we can do is just holler and scream and expose, because that's the only thing.
We are in a democracy, and groups matter. And so, when we started the center, and we started, getting more movements, we can't do this by ourselves. It's going to take, us screaming, and I don't know the word screaming, but we got to do things in a positive way. But it's going to take people a much more of a larger contingent to really keep working on this. Because right now, the other problem is we have a shortage of police all over. Now people don't want to go into policing, so it's having a reverse effect as well. And so, how do we even look at policing? People want to go into policing, and like in New Orleans, we're half capacitated right now. I mean, we just don't have the manpower to deal with of what we're dealing with, and murder rates, all this stuff is going on right now. Is skyrocketing, and just a lot going on in terms of crime and things of that nature. That just seems endless on a day-to-day basis. But we certainly need police. We can't get rid of them. And I hate when students or people say, "We got to get rid of the police." That's going to make things worse. But and maybe most police are doing a good job. I don't know. I guess sometimes we generalize and we shouldn't be, and it's just a few select that are maybe not doing well, and it makes it bad for everybody else. As they say. So, but we just don't know. We're just not on the inner circle. But we'll continue to work on that. So I know we're a little bit over time, and I appreciate you all. I really enjoyed this and getting to know you all, and hopefully at some point, perhaps next year, we can have you all on campus and get to know you all better and share more, and I can kind of update us on where you are, et cetera. But I really appreciate you all joining us in this Zoom. I've certainly, always enjoyed these. I mean, it's just always good to meet people, share experience. We all learn from this, et cetera. And we're all kind of doing the same things. And again, I apologize for society for having you all in prison for things that I've always, one of the most worst things I've heard, and not only with you guys and other people we had on campus, being in prison for things you haven't committed. I just cannot imagine. Life is so short, and just being, and then after you release, there's nobody apologizing. Nobody's giving you, it's just a shame. It's a shame that we operate like this, Right. Hey, we're gonna give you all $1 million. That's what y'all should deserve for whatever compensation for at least, I don't know. It's just it's a frustrating system. And as I hear these cases one after the other, and it's like, how were you in prison? What evidence? There was no evidence. It was just nothing, and it's just people getting railroaded. And we should be better than this, So all we can do is continue to fight. We have entities here in New Orleans, Court Watch NOLA, things people that try to watch everything that's going on. To try to make sure people get a fair sentence, a fair trial, just fairness. The evidence is there. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, then you just do things fairly. That's all anybody can ask from our system. But it's broken. I don't know if it'll ever get quite fixed the way we would like it. But we got to avoid this. And I appreciate you all's humanity. I mean, obviously coming out, and I see you all's spirit as you all are talking to us. And we appreciate that, and I know it's hard, and I'm glad you all found each other back, and your son, and I mean, so at least you all are not, still in prison. We count the blessings, but I can see you all are good-spirited folks, and I can see the positive spirit in your faces, and it's appreciative, and we're glad that you all are able to join us and share your story with us. I mean, it's really, and hopefully we can share it more, and hopefully we can meet you all in person at some point soon, and you can, be introduced to a lot more people that we can introduce you to that are doing the same kind, because we got to connect.
Yeah.
So
we have a lot of stories too.
There's a lot of stories. I mean, obviously we can sit all day, and that's why dinner, I like to sit down for dinner for hours and just talk. Right. And there's a lot going on. And sometimes, as we started the center the last couple of years, I've never met so many people in my life, in my time, so it's hard to, it's been really good, for the teaching and learning aspect to meet the people that are doing this kind of work and experienced it, and appreciate it, because we need folks fighting, and it's unfortunate you all had to fight and ended up the way it did. but I'm a big believer in God. God is watching. He's going to reward you for your blessings that you have. So I'm big confidence in that. I'm a Muslim by faith. I'll share that, and God will. He's watching, overseeing, and
Thank you for that.
It's I went to the mosque a few. I go to prayer service on Fridays, and I'll just conclude here. I know we're over time, but he just said something. He's reading an excerpt from the Quran, and he says, God created this world for us to be peaceful and to enjoy it, and we look around, centuries in war and all. How do we live? It's just, he created life for us to enjoy it, to have fun. I mean, just make it simple. I mean, it wasn't created to the heavens and earth. We're not created to live like this. It's just a shame that we look over centuries of information and history, how we just kill each other. And I took the students to DC for a trip, we did a freedom ride to DC. So I took them back in October, and I'd never been to the Holocaust Museum. And I just went in there, and I just was just in tears. I mean, just watching, how do we live? How do people do this? It just doesn't fathom to me. I just get up in the morning, do the best I can, and I go to bed. I mean, I don't know. It's that simple. That's simple. I just don't understand what people's mind and why we engage in some of this stuff. It's just, appalling. I don't know how people think. I'm not certainly not perfect, but I just, it's just amazing that people do this to each other.
Right.
And,
yeah. So, yeah, I hear you, man. And, we are determined to share our experiences and our feelings and our vibes with like-minded people. And people who want to treat people a certain way. I'm not going to holler outside their building. I'm never going in their building. I'm not going to give them any of our support. And I think that's an effective, you're treating a certain segment of society a certain way. No, you don't need to be supported by anybody who don't agree with how you're treating people. And I don't care who it is, whether it's politicians, whether it's just, store owners that are discriminating against people, and I think that is more effective than setting up camp outside there, we're not going in there. You do your thing and let it be known, let it be known that this is how you're treating people. And the
bottom line is, and it's not that old adage notion, I want to be treated like I treat you like the way I want to be treated. And if everybody just followed that ad, we'd be a great, wonderful society. If we all, if we just did that.
And I think that's the thing. We just have to just do the best we can do and lead by example. We try to lead by example. We don't want young kids to smoke. We don't smoke. We don't want certain things that happen. We don't do it. We encourage, especially the younger generation, because that's who's going to be carrying on. Just to be good.
And I know we're out of time, and I'll just say this. I'm concerned. We're working with a lot of the young people in the center. We're working with a lot of our schools. We're getting out there because I'm very concerned about the future and our young people. I'm not very optimistic. I'll just say it. It just seems like we're just lost so much morality, so much. We're just sort of families breaking up, and there's so much going on. You just feel like you're not going back. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and it was just a different time. And I appreciate the time I grew up in, but now it just seems, I don't know. It doesn't seem like we're heading in the right direction, no matter what we're doing.
Well, yeah, I think we need to spend. I'm glad you said that, because I think we need to spend more time talking to the community rather than politicians.
Right.
I do, because
I think it all starts in the home. Really, it is the community. And we were talking the other day about doing summer programming with reading, and said, well, in order to get these kids here, we got to give them some rewards and incentives. Well, I'm giving them free service. I don't know what else to do. I got to give them, money and rewards and gift cards just to come learn reading. I don't know. I don't know. It's so bizarre. The whole thing is bizarre.
I know it is a heavy feeling on your heart, but, and the only thing we can do is just like when we go to bed at night is to feel good that we're trying to be good people because and then and happy that somebody's either learning from our example or taking from our example or just trying to do the best that they can do because of what we've been through or what we've taught or what we're radiating out there to people. And that's really all you're doing, Doctor. I think you're doing a great job.
Yeah,
like the things that you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, we regret that anybody's getting hurt. Anybody on either side.
Right.
We regret that anyone's getting hurt, man. And we don't want that animosity and fight because the only ones that profit from that is those who have people subjugated in the first place. They are the only people that profit from infighting or, you know, any kind of fighting. They're the only people that profit from that, really.
Yeah.
So
And most of what we fight about is nonsense anyway. That's why I always say
It
take the
really
high
is.
road. Most very little things is worth fighting. Take the high road and move on. You know, it just you know, like I said, you know, and again, I appreciate you all being on. I know we're over time. It's been a pleasure to know
We
you all.
appreciate you having
yeah,
us.
and we are hoping that it'd be before next year, but you know,
Yeah, we appreciate you having us.
Well,
yeah,
part of my
we'd
problem
like
too
to.
is that, you know, full schedule. There's only so much you can do at a time.
Oh,
But as
yeah.
I work on
Right,
I work on the calendar for next year, I'm actually talked to Liam earlier today and trying to see if we can, you know, fit another time for you all to come, because we'd love to meet you all in person. Although I felt a good conversation here. We'd love to have you all in person, and to kind of go beyond just having a individual, even beyond that, and to get to know
We
you
were
all.
looking forward to getting to your bed and breakfast too.
Everybody loves the mansion. Everybody loves that mansion. You know, everybody who comes in, they take pictures like this. Look at all the pictures. Like, look, I think my
Yeah,
boyfriend. That mansion,
yeah,
people love that mansion,
yeah.
etc.
We
And
were looking
so
forward to it.
we like to support Dillard alumni. You know, one of our Dillard alumni, you know, owns that, and so we always like to support. You know, we support each other.
Right.
That mansion, everybody just loves. I've just gotten high 5 marks on that mansion, etc. Actually, we just started using it this semester. We, you know, always put people in hotels. And it was like, well, let's you know, I met Dr. Huber. I said, well, you should send them in. I looked at it. It's fabulous.
Well, I'll tell you what, Doc, this may be your schedule, but it's not ours. So
Right.
we may come down there before another formal system.
Well, if you do come out, let me know. You have my cell. Y'all know how to reach me. We'd love to get together with you guys. And in the mansion, you know, he doesn't charge me tax either. So you know, you want to take
That's a good thing.
There you
take
go.
advantage of that. You know, set price for me, so I get those special.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us, and apologies again, and
It's
hopefully we'll
nobody's
see you
fault.
soon.
It happens. But again, we will look forward to maybe doing something on later on.
Okay,
right.
sounds good.
All right.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ismail.
Thanks, Errol.
Thank you, Dillard. Thank you, students, everybody. Thank you guys who all stayed. Hope to see you soon.
All right.